I was at the DevOps Enterprise Summit a couple weeks ago, and Gene Kim was talking about influences for his newest book, The Unicorn Project. And lo and behold, on the screen, there was 11 books listed up there, and Effective DevOps, which Jennifer Davis co-authored, was one of the books that was cited up there. Jennifer is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. Previously, she was a principal site reliability engineer at RealSelf and developed cookbooks to simplify building and managing infrastructure at Chef and built reliable service platforms at Yahoo. We're really excited to have Jennifer here. She flew a great distance to be here with us today, so take it away, Jennifer.
Good morning. Woo. So I'm not going to apologize for this in advance, but I am going to let you know that I am a morning person, so this is going to be fun for me. So today I want to talk to you about the ultimate guide to complicated systems. This talk was inspired by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If it wasn't evident, I enjoy science fiction and fantasy. So in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, how many folks have read or know about this? Fantastic, my people. So Arthur Dent, he wakes up one morning and discovers that someone has decided to destroy his house. People are there and like, time for you to evacuate. He's like, wait, what? And he's like, well, if you had a problem with it, you should have just let us know at the appropriate time and place. Like, now's too late. He's trying to argue with them and determine what is it that I can do to make this stop. And his best friend comes along and says, we need to go to the pub. Of course, Arthur's like, what's the pub? No, they're going to destroy my house. Ford goes along and sort of paves over issues and says, like, yeah, we're just going to go to the pub. They go down to the pub, and as they're there, Ford tells him, I'm an alien. Arthur looks at him, kind of wondering what's going on with this friend. He is a little odd. Ford tells him, the world is going to end. Thank goodness you've got a towel. It's time to go. Now, Arthur doesn't think this is real, but of course the Vogons are there. The Earth is going to get destroyed to make way for the Galaxy Highway Station. So folks are just like, oh. So actually what I want to talk about today is to question this idea that there is an ultimate guide. Ford indeed is an alien. He's also the researcher for the compendium of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, of everything there is to know. But when it comes down to it, what he needs is that towel. So I want to talk about today, what is that towel or any practices that can help us navigate complicated environments that we are in. So meet Bit. Bit is an intrepid operations engineer. He has all the characteristics that you would want out of an operations engineer. He's curious, he likes to try new things. He's great in emergencies. He has been tasked to implement the SRE with the DevOps team, making sure to apply agile and lean methodologies while maintaining velocity of development and deployment to production. Now, you should use serverless because that will help us decrypt our monoliths to our microservices. But maybe if you rub a little Kubernetes on it, that will solve all your problems. But make sure you maintain your cloud native environment, because if we go back to on-prem, we'll have all of those issues again. And you know what? That's a lot of toil for our operators. Well, I know what we need to do. We need to figure out where the wastes in the systems are. We can just do some value stream mapping. No. What we're talking about these days is finding a competitive advantage. We need to create a Wardley map. Did I hear you say DevOps? I think you meant DevSecOps. We've got to get that continuous security going. No. You missed it. It's DevSecTestOps now. We're also doing continuous testing. hey, I have heard that you get DevOps for free if you have some observability. No, 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 no. What you heard is if you have observability, we don't need operations anymore, so we're doing no ops. No, 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 no. It's new ops, not no ops. We're not telling anybody. Okay. So all joking aside, you can see we've got a lot of stuff going on. What should we do? How should we do it? There's totally value in some of the things that I just talked about in that quick span of time. There is tools and practices and methodologies. People go on stage and speak about them and tell you about their success. Dr. Nicole Fosgren has shared through the State of the DevOps report and the Accelerate book research that shows that some of these things have effects that you can see in high-performing teams. But people are still struggling. So how do I, as an individual, navigate my path? Is there a single path that will help me get to success? Is it just that I haven't figured out the right path? Well, no. What we have is different set of unknowns. We have different contexts from which we're working from. I mean, if you imagine a game where every single game in the world has the same dungeon map and we're navigating the same path, like that would be a very boring set of games and we'd just get tired and not play them anymore. So, what should we do taking into account that there is a whole set of unknowns that we just don't understand? I want to share with you a project. 4 years ago, I embarked on this project to deliver this particular feature. I have 20 years of experience, over 20 years at this point. I know how to build complicated systems. I am really good at building and maintaining them. I enjoy it. So obviously, this should be really easy. I want to share some of the principles that I distilled from building this product with you, because I think it informs to how we can successfully have progress even with constantly changing environments and new technologies and tools. So the first thing, no one is going to tell you what the value of your system is. When you think, if you're building something new, if you think you know what you're building or deploying, and you understand, like in your head, like this is what this value is going to bring, you're wrong. You might figure it out, but it's until you actually start writing and committing that first set of code or developing the process and the design, that's when you all of a sudden start to understand the value that this new thing is going to bring to you. Not only that, it changes over time, especially when it gets into production. As soon as it's in production, all of a sudden you have a new set of values that you never realized. No one can tell you. To add to it, anyone that interacts with your product is going to have a different set of values associated with that product. A lot of the problems that we have in our conflict with our customers is because we haven't resolved the dissonance that comes from these different value sets. Another aspect is thinking through our state transitions. When I first held my colicky, crying baby in my arms, I was so relieved when he fell asleep. And as I sat there with this sleeping child who'd been crying for nonstop, and I was so ready to just get some food, get some drink in me, maybe go lay down, I realized I didn't know how to get him from point A on me to point B without waking him up. We don't often talk about or think about what it looks like to get from one place to the next with our systems. So documentation matters. And this is kind of the things that already exist in our environments, things about the software that we're deploying or using, and things that we create ourselves. Pre-existing documentation helps us understand, is this thing that I'm experiencing right now, is that actually a valid thing? Does everybody always have this and we just need to fix it? Or is this new to me and like I need to worry about it? Checklists help us understand we're getting to this specific goal and where we're having problems. So we need to think about how to document our state transitions. So some examples of this is, what does it look like when I've tested, but I haven't merged code yet? I've installed something, but it's not ready yet. It's ready, but it's not live in production yet. It's live in production and customers are starting to use it. And thinking about how all of those different states, how it changes what we need to do. We need to document our known limitations. Sometimes if a database gets too full, CPU utilization is too high, disk space is too high, we can't do 100% utilization. We have to understand what is my max that I can use. And then that helps me understand when I need to worry. Creating templates is super useful as documentation, having pre-planned responses to questions that customers have. If you use GitHub, you can create issue response or PR checklists to let people know what their expectations are. And then your checklists, they're not meant as a, hey, you're not able to do this job. It's to let you know, to have some guidance, to understand when something breaks, what to specifically focus on, as also know when something's working as expected, if it follows the checklist. And yet, no matter how much planning you do not have control over everything. So you have to plan for the arrival of the unexpected. So part of that is thinking through the DevOps with design. And that's during your planning process, talk about the what ifs. What if a region or availability zone goes away? What if an instance dies? What if there's network or DNS issues? It's always surprising to me that people assume that some of these things are 100% available. Any dependence you have on something else, that is the max availability that you can have. What do you do if an artifact you depend on is compromised? Can you actually quickly build your product on the new release of the artifact? Plan for these outages. We don't need to suffer and just accept what is given to us. We need to plan. And yes, be calm in the advent of problems. This managed chaos, because children are the original chaos engineers, helps us build resilience, helps us be able to handle what we're trying to do. And when I talk about managed chaos, what I'm talking about is setting those boundaries and understanding, like, here is where the chaos can exist. So sometimes documentation is wrong. Sometimes maybe the context of what it was written for doesn't apply to you. Sometimes it's absolutely correct, but you cannot use it in that time. Maybe it's not the right formatting for you. Maybe it's too much information and it's just overloaded. So this is something to think about when you're writing documentation. Have different formats for it, because sometimes it's just one set isn't enough. Sometimes documentation gets out of date. Sometimes people have information that's they're intentionally withholding, and that creates this gap of accurate information. Having some meta processes around handling the unknown is completely helpful in these cases. Documentation doesn't guarantee understanding. Sorry. Just because something's documented doesn't mean everybody on your team understands what the plan is or is even going to follow it, because maybe they just didn't understand. So you can't depend on documentation being the sole way of getting to success. And sometimes you're going to make mistakes. I have over 20 years of experience. I know what it means to be redundant, and yet that first doctor's visit, diaper comes off, and you know what? That shit totally happened, and I was not prepared. Who knew you should have redundant clothing when you go to your first doctor's visit for your baby? I learned it's okay. We all make mistakes. When it comes to making mistakes, we need to have a blameless culture. We need to encourage the psychological safety that allows individuals to share the process that they made when they made their decisions. The people who are most able to help us when discovering these problems of resilience in our systems are the people who made the mistakes. So if we encourage a fear culture and for people to shut down or try to blame somebody else, that creates an environment where people aren't sharing. We want people to explain why they took the actions they did and what caused them to think about it. So it's a systemic issue and not directing and pointing to people. We need to clean up continuously. And by that, I mean alerts that are paging people that are just noise that people are ignoring. That's degradation to your environment. We need to clean up functionality. If you leave functionality just sitting there and nobody's actually using it, you're creating environments where people have access to potentially compromise you and you're not paying attention to that functionality that nobody's using. We need to clean up infrastructure that's no longer being used. Same thing as with functionality, that infrastructure, when not in use, is just creating compromised targets. We need to clean up tests. Just like alerts, tests can be noisy, and that creates extra work for people to do. And then finally, we need to clean up the data that we're collecting. And by that I mean, if it's data that we're collecting and we're not using it, or it's no longer useful to us, if you leave it around, compromises happen all the time, and you don't want to make yourself vulnerable to these things, especially if you've been collecting data that you shouldn't. We often talk about snowflakes from a manual configuration. If you have them, you'll build systems that are special snowflakes. And I'm not talking about those snowflakes. Those snowflakes are not good because you will have problems with that. What I'm talking about is every environment, every organization, even if two different organizations deploy the same set of software with the same exact dependencies, with the same exact purpose, they're still two different systems. Because the people that are managing it, the people who are supporting it, the customers that are using it, all impact the system. And so embrace your special snowflake. It's okay. Let's share pictures and information about our special snowflakes, because that's how we, as a group, as a community, become better. That special snowflake changes. On day 1, day 10, day 90, day 365, it evolves. It's very strange to me to think about from a system perspective that it's hard to grasp that expectations that have changed. When you have a child We take pictures, we document, we watch that progress, we reflect. I still look back at pictures from day 1, month 3, and I look at them and I go, wow, and I can see how this little system has completely changed. It's not the same as day 1, when it was a pile of goo that I struggled putting on clothes, and now walking around telling me and asking me questions that I am surprised. I have bones, he says. This is the same thing with our systems, and yet we don't have ways to reflect and record our progress, other than mailing lists and Slack channels that we describe and talk about our systems, but we don't go back and look at them in that moment, kind of analyzing, where have we been and where are we at now? When it comes to systems, the number one important thing are the people. You are part of the system. So many times, I see people forgetting this aspect, and it causes a lot of conflict in the systems that we build. 24-hour on-call is not sustainable, and yet, in a lot of places, it's accepted. And rightly so, sometimes in really small teams, it's what we have to do, especially right after you have a baby and it's a team of 2 or 1. It's not sustainable in the long term. But in the short term, when you have to deal with it, it's really important to take care of yourself. And that's making sure you're eating the right foods, getting enough sleep, even while the systems may be hard to manage. It's hard sometimes to know when an event happens and particular activities happen that this could be trauma. You could have a traumatic event happen to you. It took the trauma of having a child, and I'm not talking about the birth, but like events around it, and for me to think about it and process it, to sort of understand this and see this in the systems that we build and maintain. For me, it was being in a situation where I didn't have control. I delivered my child, and they were telling me, you have to stay here and do this magnesium drip because of your preeclampsia, or you will die. Meanwhile, my child is in the NICU. He's a preemie. And they had said, you will have access to him, but then there was no availability, and I didn't have access. So for that first 24 hours, I was not with my child. And that was traumatic for me. For some people, that might have been completely okay in a break. That wasn't my experience. And the same thing that happens in our work environments. You might have a situation, an incident, even your team members might be completely fine with it. But for you, it's an event that you need to handle. For me, what helped, I had never heard of postpartum anxiety. And I took this anxiety class and discovered some of the different mechanisms. And then as I reflected on it, I realized some of the events that happened to me in the workplace had led to me responding with anxiety, continuously getting paged 24, like being on the pager 24/7 for, well, it was actually 24/365 because I was the one ops engineer for a product. And that has built sort of anxiety around being on call. We don't talk enough about this, and I really encourage folks who are experiencing these kind of toxic environments or problematic environments to use the open space today to talk about it. Because burnout isn't an end state. It's something we talk about as if you reach burnout and like, let's avoid it, but you reach it. It's actually a slow progression that over time, we feel exhausted, we feel depressed. Everybody has slightly different ways of feeling, but you just don't feel yourself. And sort of the antidote to it is to find a little balance. And I don't mean work-life balance, because when it comes down to it, our work is our life. I don't mean that's the only thing that we do. But it's about finding the balance of having the freedom to work the way that you need to and want to work. It means it means balancing the challenges that you have, approaching your work having challenge to actually accomplish rather than just doing the same thing day after day. It's about having a learning environment and learning from the people that you work with, not just, again, doing the same thing. Having a positive atmosphere. And by that, I don't mean, hey, everyone, you should smile more, or you should just be okay with this, or assume positive intent. That is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is in an atmosphere that encourages psychological safety so people can express themselves when something is going wrong. Don't be like Marvin from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where everything's depressing and we just need to go through. Yeah, that's not helpful. But creating an atmosphere that we can all thrive in. And then having that personally meaningful contribution. I liked how in the opening there was discussion about how we're changing with DevOps to have like the artisanal contributions, and that's really important. Another key element is that you don't have to do this alone. For so many years, I worked at Yahoo for over 6 years. There was this focus on individual excellence. And often we're rewarded based on keep doing what you're doing and even more excellence. One of the values of coming together as DevOps days and participating not only just in the community here, but the community around the world of practitioners and changing how we work is that we don't have to be alone. For me, when I first had my child, there's documentation about how you nurse a child. It seems like this is obvious. You just take the child, apply it to your breast, nursing. That's not how it works. I had an awesome community of folks that I collaborated with and talked to, expressed my problems, found resolutions, and then I could go back and help other people who came in. And that's kind of what I mean by community. It's an active participation. It's not just, hey, I'm sitting listening to the talks today. It's join the open spaces, share your problems, even if it feels like, oh, everyone else knows how to solve this problem. We have to have this space today to have that psychological safety to help build that community. Find your special communities for whatever special parts of your job that you need help with. And then build and strengthen not just the relationships with your team, with your community members, but your family and your friends. And if you don't like people, your puppies and cats and lizards and whatever else, because those relationships are also important. And regardless as to the sort of jokiness I used at the beginning with all these terms in technology, technology is evolving. We need to keep learning. It needs to be a process in our teams. It needs to be a process in our organization as we iterate through the life cycle of planning, designing, all the way into monitoring and deploying into production. We need to learn from each step that we take. Otherwise, we're going to build stuff that doesn't matter. But as individuals, we also need to keep learning and thinking. New technology and new practices are being discussed. In open spaces today, you can talk about Kubernetes. You can talk about serverless. You drive the conversations that we have. There's a ton of folks blogging on Dev2 across the world, so there's like different languages. That's That's very interesting, but as well, you can participate in the community by contributing your own blog if you don't have one. You can write articles about anything from new, challenging problems you faced to stuff that you've done a long time ago. Create meetups. They don't have to all look the same. They don't have to be evening meetups. You can have morning meetups. I started something called Coffee Ops, where at different places we have like this driven by participants topics that helps people find what they need in that moment. Sometimes what people need is to talk about their pay. Am I getting paid for what I'm worth? Sometimes it's about, is this job as toxic as it feels? That is super helpful and critical. You can contribute to open source projects. How many people have contributed to open source on GitHub or GitLab or anything? Raise your hand high. How many people have not? I encourage that to be an open space because all of us have something to contribute. What's helping you or hindering you from doing that? Is it understanding the technology? Or to my mind, one of the biggest challenges is people not understanding what value they can bring. It's not just developers that bring value. Operations folks also bring value. Design also brings value. Testing, data engineering, all of this is important and we need everyone to make these products be valuable. Many libraries have Lynda and O'Reilly Safari subscriptions. You can find effective DevOps on Safari, and that's where Ren and I distilled a lot of the practices. It is not a technical book intentionally. I'm actually working on a new book, Modern System Administration, which is a technical book. It's available for early release, and if you have feedback, you can totally give it to me because that's how early release works. It's kind of DevOps for authors and readers to make a more helpful book. We at Microsoft have this free resource for self-paced learning, and I have a link in the slides that I will share. And so whatever, there's a lot of companies that have these free learning labs now, but it'll spin up a sandbox for you. So you don't even have to have like an Azure subscription and spend money. You can just try out some different things. There's also Test Automation University, which is a great resource coming out of stuff that Angie Jones has worked. If you have never done testing before, I totally encourage you because again, continuously testing, we all should be testing in some way or another. When it comes down to it, you are the only one who knows your context. If you take in and hear and learn different things today, it's great. You can let go of anything that doesn't help you. It's okay. Production is chaos. One of the things that I feel we miss out on is accepting what it is that we get. If we're able to accept this product that we've built for all of its complexities, it will bring us much more joy and sorrow than we could have ever imagined. And this isn't to say that we should accept toxic environments. I encourage you to reject toxic environments. This also isn't to say accept working on an unethical technology. There are so many problems out there that we need to solve. Too many Black women are dying in childbirth. We have climate change issues. We have algorithms for self-driving cars that are killing people. None of these things are okay. If you're working on technology that is unethical, maybe try helping solve some of these systemic issues. I promise you, your work will be meaningful. In Hitchhikers, the original experiment determined that 42 was the answer to everything. The Earth was the computer program to determine the ultimate question. I think that if we step back and instead of trying to find the ultimate guide or answer, and we think about what is the journey that we're trying to make and the people that we meet along the way, and accept that we're part of the system that we're building, it will be a much better experience for us all. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and feelings. I love feedback. You can reach me on my email or Twitter, and my slides are available right now from that bit.ly link. Thank you. Oh, do I have time? Oh, I am a little early. Anybody have any questions? Feelings?
Yeah, are there any questions for Jennifer Davis? Yes, you in the back.
So these are very specific for a senior person. How do you foster this type of community, say if you're a leader? What effort can we make to make employees or people who contract with the workforce feel that this is an okay way to be?
So the question is, how do you foster this for a larger group as leaders?
Excellent question. The first part of the question I want to clarify is, I feel that we all have the possibility of being leaders, and management should not be the only people making decisions about how we do things. So as leaders, even if you have no control over how other people on your team work, you have control over yourself and where you're going and how you work. And as a leader that is a manager, my advice is, there's a whole book that I've written called Effective DevOps, but it distills into CATS. And CATS is encouraging collaboration. So not just say, hey, everybody collaborate, work together, because that is not helpful, but creating an environment that allows people to collaborate and reward people for collaborating. Whether it's seniors working with seniors, seniors working with juniors, allowing people to, or encouraging and valuing mentoring. I don't see very many programs that, especially in the US, where people are encouraged and rewarded for mentoring. A is affinity. Help people build relationships. And so by that, making sure that they're able to come to conferences like this. This is a work day. How many people had to take off today from work to actually come to the conference? It's a very common practice I see that people have to take off work to attend things, and that's not healthy. So managers should make an effort to encourage a continuous learning environment where people are able to go to conferences, meet people, and there's no direct strategic gain. There's no like, here's the value add, you got this new technology and you came back and did this thing with it. Because just being here and participating, like active participation, gives you a little immunity towards the drain that comes from burnout. T is for tools. Tools do matter. Don't dictate what tools people use unless it needs to be something that people collaborate across different teams. So make space for people to choose their own editor. Definitely encourage people to share configurations. There's the next talk is about VS Code, which is awesome because there's so much to it. But don't inflict pain to your ops folks. Like say, hey, developers use Bugzilla, so ops should use Bugzilla because it's just a ticketing system, right? And then S is scaling. And scaling is not about your systems. It's about, say, the pivot points that you have to make as an organization. Sometimes you have to change dynamically, often change dynamically, and sometimes it's very sad, and you need to let people go. And there's good ways to let people go, and there's bad ways. And good ways is respecting, not surprising people. It should never be a surprise. But respecting people and valuing them. We don't celebrate enough when people leave companies. We don't celebrate the fact that even when people choose to leave, that should be a celebration. So the good scaling, where we're growing our organization, we're changing, whatever that case is, creating an environment where people have that possibility of providing that feedback and learning. Is that helpful? Awesome.
All right, we have time for another question, if there's any. Yes, sir.
So when you were talking about baby pictures, does that equate to obsolete documentation?
Does baby pictures equate to obsolete documentation? That's the question.
I would say that's one part of it. Often people think, this is why, I think there's room for so much improvement in how we write documentation, collect documentation. We have libraries of books, and librarians are amazing, and I think if we could DevOps some library science and information management into our processes, that would be amazing. If you look at Yahoo Groups as a tool that people have used, and then the sadness that is happening right now because it's getting retired and all this content is being deleted off the web, or even GeoCities a few years ago, but Yahoo Groups specifically, there's some technology and that it's dependent, people are dependent on it. I've also been at companies where they just completely decided we're gonna delete all these old archives of mailing lists. I'm like, you just deleted all the decision-making processes you made and why something works the way it does. We don't always remember to put this discussion in the git commit message. So yeah, good question.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Any other questions? This side of the room seems question heavy. All right, what do you got?
What do you do when you start talking with somebody new to make sure that you're using the same language? So DevOps is a word that means something different to every prospective employer I've talked to. What do you do to make sure you're on the same page?
So how do you level set the language that you use to describe things within an organization around DevOps?
This is an incredibly important question because it's not just the word DevOps. Every single word we have, every single acronym we have is a critical process to first define the words that we use. So especially in new meetings where you're trying to build a product, you want to talk about what are our assumptions and how are we defining specific words. And so never assume that everyone's on the same page. This is how you end up with mismatches between what developers have built and operations are accepting. My first step is always listening, asking the question. Sometimes people assume this means, oh, I must not know what I'm doing. But it's ask. What does DevOps mean? What does ACL mean? What does whatever the thing that you think you all know what you're talking about? If you think about this, what is an event? What is an alert? What is an alarm? What is an incident? Every single one of these terms means something different, especially when you go to use a product like PagerDuty. An incident is anything that pages. To me, an incident is when it actually has an impact. Right?
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. So we had let's give her a hand. So